everyone, and welcome back to the Grimm Chronicles. This is episode 34 for 2022, or 89 in the whole series, which I started back in January of 2021. And I just chat about life in general and what I've been reading. So for quite a while now, I've been reading 2 books, and I'm still reading them. I haven't finished them yet. So Before the Storm, which I won't talk much about this week, but I still love it, by Theodor Fontane, the German 19th century writer from around Berlin, Prussia. And then also I am making my way through Thomas Bernhard's short auto fiction work, Wittgenstein's Nephew. And this is the one that will try and finish by next week, I promise. I'll do my best because I've sort of committed to it. It's a very strange book, and I was kind of thrown off by the little quote by the German critic Marcel Reich-RaniCKi on the back. It says here, I'm just kind of casually translating it, "Never has Bernhard written more humanely and more tenderly." And if this is Bernhard being humane and tender, watch out, because it's bleak. He's quite... it's very, very interesting. So what he's doing is he's sort of describing his friend, and I remember saying in one of the chats I had about the book already that I thought that they would never meet, and they did meet, and he does it in such a sort of, oh, by the way, we did meet way, that you're kind of caught off guard. It's not caught off guard because it's such a big deal. It's just in a sentence. He just happens, suddenly he's been talking about all the things, all the thoughts he's been having about what would happen if they did meet. And then sort of in a subordinate clause, he kind of mentions, oh yeah, they did meet. And then they decided not to meet anymore because it didn't go that well. It's very strange. And so he's describing his friend Paul, the nephew of Ludwig Wittgenstein, and they're from a very rich family. And to be honest, what he seems to be doing is he keeps going. It's a little bit like in Julius Caesar with the speech. He keeps on saying that he's a good friend and he's my friend and I really, really like him. But the way he's portraying him, he doesn't seem like a very likable person, if that makes sense. So he's very kind of, I mean, you feel sorry for him, I guess. And maybe that's what the narrator does too, because he has these mental issues, these kind of depressive episodes that he has. But basically, he lived a life of luxury where he kind of like went through the money that he inherited from the Wittgenstein wealth. And Thomas goes on about him sitting in these rich hotels drinking champagne at a rate that you wouldn't believe. Like, he's just kind of lived this life of frivolous, to a point, enjoyment of the arts and everything. He's an opera aficionado, and that's why the Thomas character, Bernhard's character or narrator, likes him, because they can have these really deep discussions about opera and music. But even that, he kind of like, he'll like praise him, and then but by describing how he actually is, it doesn't really seem very positive. Like, he's apparently a very strange and not very likable fellow, and I think that's on purpose. It's sort of like, that's why I'm kind of taken aback by this little quote on the back. I think it's maybe sarcasm on, I mean, if this is him being tender and humane, ooh. But maybe that's the point with Bernhard. Maybe this is his edit. Maybe, I don't even know. I read one other novel, which I did like too. It was very strange. It had sort of linguistic stuff going on that was interesting. But I guess what's surprising is that despite all this negativity, the fact that he's kind of describing it in a way that is not that negative, even though he says he's his friend, you're still kind of enthralled by it, or I am pulled along by it enough to want to keep going. Like, I don't dislike it, even though it isn't sort of, it's not jolly, it's not uplifting in any way. It's the opposite in a certain sense. There's a darkness here, I think. And also, so of course the narrator, who is Thomas, or a stand-in for Thomas Bernhard, has gone into his side of the pavilion because of his illness. And so one of the most interesting passages that I just read was a kind of long discourse on how, between people who are ill, so who are seriously ill and the healthy, and he kind of makes these strong distinctions between the land of the healthy and the land of the ill, and in the sense of how the sick people hate it when the healthy people try and help them, and he's kind of taking the point of view of a sick person, and he's very kind of negative about the healthy people. He says all of their attempts to help are hypocritical, and he talks about they're self-serving in a certain sense. And it's interesting because I do think that is kind of an issue with, if you kind of, not that I've ever been seriously ill, but I do have some mild chronic issues, and I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis back in the day. So you do kind of have a different perspective on life from the perspective of someone who's not well. And then your relationship to well people is different, and it can kind of become fraught in certain ways. And I think that's what he's getting at, but it's very negative. And then at the end of it, he says, but on the other hand, Paul did have a very loving wife who helped him a lot. So I kept thinking, well, I kept thinking about, well, but for example, if you have a significant other, and even like the vows where you say in sickness and in health, you know, that sometimes there are people who have made a commitment to actually help someone. So there must be sort of exceptions to this rule of all healthy people are hypocritical in their attitudes towards the ill. And he gets sort of like, because it has to do with our relationship to death, you know, and healthy people don't really want to have anything to do with seriously ill people because of that, because of they're being confronted with mortality. And then he talks a little bit about, well, and then what happens if you get better and you come back to the land of the healthy people don't immediately kind of reintegrate. It's the reintegration issue of formerly ill people, which he came out of the illness place, not describing it well, and got better. And that even there's the relationship between the two is fraught, and it's sort of interesting and well written, but it's dark or negative. There's a negativity there. There's a relentless sort of negativity that makes me kind of give pause when I see things like humane and tender written on the back here. But it's good. It is good, and I will finish it hopefully by the end of next week. And so Before the Storm and Bernhard, so those two are going. A quick haul. I read about Evan S. Connell. I'm trying to remember where I read about. He's the person who wrote, his most famous novel is Mrs. and Mr. Bridge, Mrs. Bridges or Mr. Bridge. Perhaps he passed away. I'm sorry that I haven't done my research. But as I was reading through his novels or works, this one kind of I was interested in, the Alchymist's Journal, which is a very strange work, which gets very low reviews on Goodreads. And just like Sean from Travels Through Literature, I think that's the channel name, sorry, he sort of said, it got really bad reviews on Goodreads, which made me want to read it. And I'm kind of the same way. And I know this will be it's an experimental, he kind of pretends to be these different alchemists, including Paracelsus. And of course, I've always been interested in alchemy, and it's just one of my weird interests that I have. And so I thought, when I saw this, they build it as signed, and it's sort of signed because it has a little piece of paper with his name on it somewhere, but it wasn't that expensive anyway, and I did like and so, you know, I have his signature here, but it's not really signed. It's in the book. But I do like the woodcuts that are a part of it too. And so it's a fictional tour de force of rich historical recreation and spectacular prose. He imagines the journals of 7 alchemists, Paracelsus, and other people. And I'm trying to think who the other ones, say who the other ones are? I don't know. Anyway, it's going to be an interesting sort of experimental read that I will get to at some point. It's more like this is almost something that I just wanted to have. I don't know when I'll read it, but I will at some point. Add it to my alchemy collection that I don't really have one, but I have a few books on alchemy. I'm always interested in alchemy. And so my new audiobook, so for a while I was very frustrated because I had given up on bewilderment because I didn't like it. That's right, that's what happened last week. And it was, but then I always have to do my chores every day. I come home. By the way, school is kicking my rear end. I still haven't really found the groove with my big classes and all the grading, but I'm doing okay and we'll manage. It's just my job. But every day I have to do my chores, mainly cleaning the litters, to be honest. And I needed a good audiobook, and I landed on a great one, I really think. This is a book I went to my Goodreads and looked at my the ones I had marked as ones I want to read, and I found Sigrid Undset's Nobel Prize winning Danish-Norwegian writer, long trilogy about Kristin Lavransdatter. So one woman's life, and it takes place, I forget which century, maybe 1300s, 14th century, so Middle Ages, medieval Norway. One woman's life, and it's brilliant prose, or very kind of, I've fallen into it deeply. It's just beautifully written. It's just like, you know, bring it on. I'm loving it so much, and I really think I'm going to love the whole thing. And it's long, and I really like these long books when I'm listening to them. And what I did on the Goodreads is I decided, because I'm such a slow reader and I need to have more books read, that I would count each book, like the three of them, as 3 different books as opposed to one long book, because then, you know, I'll get more books. So the first one is her childhood, and when she's still a young girl, and something very traumatic has just happened, and they were doing so well, and then this big bad event happened, and it's just very moving to listen to. It's well read by, I'll get you the name because this reading will be happening for a long time, so I'll find out the name of the reader. And also, well, there's different translations. I think I am listening to the new translation, and I think her name is Tina Ninoli, something Tina N. And I know her because she also translated Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales from the Danish to English. She's sort of the Norwegian Danish translator of today. And so I think I'm listening to her translation, but the book version I have, which I also kind of consult because I want to, you know, put the updates of how much I read on Goodreads, is a different one. It's the older one, I think. And it doesn't matter. I mean, it's fine. It's actually interesting to me to compare the two now and then. So I'm so happy that I found that book, because I really kind of cling to my audio because I need something to occupy my mind. Sometimes I have it on when I'm eating, or just when I'm doing something where I don't want to, where I can listen. And so I'm glad I found that. I'm very happy I found that. The final book I want to talk to you about is sort of, it might end up being yet another project. Margaret Young's a project. Back in the day, I wanted to read books that were about birds. That might still be a project. I have my tree thing, which is basically the overstory, but I'm interested in trees. But another one is connected to my heritage, which is New Zealand. Some of you may know or remember, I have mentioned it before. My mother was born in New Zealand, and we have Maori ancestry. Actually, I just found out that the word Maori, from their perspective, meant normal people. And for them, the non-normal people were the Europeans, and they were the Pakeha. I may be mispronouncing these words. The Pakeha. Pakeha is Europeans, and Maori, Mori, I think they might say it more like Maori, were them. And I am part Maori. I mean, small, like, well, not that small. If you go back, there's a lot of Maori ancestry in me. And there's this wonderful new book that I found out about because I was reading the Times Literary Supplement, and I don't know how I found it, but because it's not that recent. But the book is, so this is the library copy. I'll insert a picture here because it does have a nice cover. Tears of Rangi, I may not be saying it right. Tears of Rangi by Ann Salmond. Now, Ann Salmond is someone very, very well thought of. She's a New Zealand anthropologist, and has written extensively on Maori culture. And what's interesting about this book is that she's kind of, what she's doing here, she talks about it in terms of, so coming, I guess a part of me is also thinking in terms of radically decentering our Western way of seeing things in terms of biodiversity. And she comes along and talks about, what about cosmodiversity? Here she says, I'm sorry for looking down, but I'll just look down for a little bit. Here I want to explore the likelihood that, like biodiversity, cosmodiversity, in the sense of multiple worlds, may be a force for adaptation and survival. For the old Cartesian dualisms and their fragmented dreams are no longer working in science, in material matters, or in human affairs. And so what she's getting at is the fact that the Maoris and, you know, other indigenous cultures, of course, have a worldview, have an ontology, have a concept of being that is not to be discounted. And what I'm interested in, and I think she's also kind of interested in, is how we can, well, first of all, find out about their ontologies and study them and try and understand them, and then also sort of negotiate our own, and I think that would lead to a more, for me at least, decisive, not exactly renunciation, that's too strong, but just kind of realizing, you know, a kind of, in a weird, a sort of Copernican term, where, you know, when people found out that the Earth wasn't the center and it was the sun and the Earth is going around it. So that kind of, analogous to that kind of move of decentering everything to do, and it's a pretty radical step to conceive of, you know, to get away from how we view the world as Westerner people, just inherently, because that's how we grew up, and that's our culture, as not the be and end all of everything, and that other ontologies and cosmologies, I guess, are equally valid, and perhaps even more valid, or at least equally valid. Let's start there. And she seems to be interested in negotiating dialogue as opposed to simply, everything Western is terrible and awful. I mean, granted, in terms of the other people, yes, but still, and in terms of a dialogue of it. And anyway, I am very interested in Maori culture, and so this would definitely be a project. And this is also this is also kind of a collecting thing. I don't know. I don't know if I mean, maybe when I retired, I could sit down and read the whole thing, page for page. But it's more a book that I might dip into or just want to have and own. So I got the library copy first because it's not that cheap, and I was able to get it through Interlibrary loan. Yay, yay, being at a university. But I think I will just get a copy at some point of this lovely book because I have this ancestral connection. And she does talk about the New Zealand or Maori word for genealogy is wakapapa, a way of being based on complex networks that encompass all forms of life, interlinked and co-emergent. Might assist in exploring relational ways of understanding the interactions between people and the land, other life forms, waterways, and oceans. So that's an example of a more all-encompassing understanding of our world instead of a hierarchical one, or sort of only hierarchical. I'm really interested in that, and even at some point, because I did grow up in Australia, I would be interested in this kind of book where it talks about Aboriginal worldviews, because I'm kind of interested in the dreamland, the concept of the dreamland. And what's interesting to me is the Aborigines were just very different from Maoris, and suffered greatly until now. I mean, at the hands of white men, white civilization, Western civilization. And I do kind of want to move into fiction of this, but for some reason right now I'm more drawn to nonfiction about these topics. I don't know why. I did almost finish the biography of the one woman from America who married a Maori, and it had that kind of title that was a quote, "If you come ashore, we'll kill you and eat you," and there were criticisms of that book because it was a white woman from America, very kind of ensconced in academia, writing about her love for a Maori man. and even though I sort of like didn't mind it while I was reading it, maybe I did maybe those criticisms put me off enough to just put it down. I have a feeling it was more just my difficulties with nonfiction. They just don't call to me in a way that I want to finish them. And maybe that's why having a big thick book that's just sort of there for dipping into, more like a study as opposed to reading like a novel, is fine for me. But I'm very interested in it, and so I thought I'd tell you about it because it's my channel. Anyway, we're at September. It's my birthday month, so yes, I am thinking about Shaketember a little bit. The one book that I would love to, if I participate in Shaketember, well, there is this one on the docket as a related book, a Shakespeare related book, which I got recently. But to be honest, because of my work, I don't know. The one thing what I really would do, if I do a play, I want to listen to it and read it at the same time. I don't think just reading it will do it, and I don't think I have time to sit down and watch it either. But I think an audible, listening to a play and reading it might be actually quite fun and interesting. The question is, which one should I listen to? I don't want to do Hamlet. Maybe Macbeth. Because to be honest, I don't know if I've ever read Macbeth. I'm admitting that. I've read and taught King Lear. I've read Hamlet. I took a class on Shakespeare, but many, many years ago, and it was an undergraduate class as opposed to a graduate class, and I didn't really like those as much. Because when I came over from Germany, I just wandered into graduate classes, and I liked them a lot better because everyone was more relaxed. The undergraduate ones were a bunch of people and young ones, and anyway, silly me. So yeah, I'll think about it. Tell me what you're reading, and thank you all for being here. I've been watching Ann Novella's plea for more, or just for wondering why her channel was struggling, and then Steve came along and gave her a shout out. And I'm actually okay with, I'm very okay with the numbers. My comment section is quiet, but I kind of understand why, and I think I'm okay with it. Partly it's because there's just so much to do and there's so much to see, and I do think that I should kind of look more maybe at the analytics as to how many people actually watch a video. Well, I see the views, so I do have that. I'm actually pretty content with everything, even though people are quiet. It's just the way, I kind of understand it. And I have a sense that you are out there. And that's good enough. Because, I am doing it for everyone, for the community, but I'm also kind of doing it as an exercise in documentation and almost a type of memory keeping. So there is that aspect too. So I'm kind of also doing it for myself, even though, I'm doing it for the, but, and we all, and I've talked a little bit about how I have a strange relationship to the book trip community because I'm sort of on the periphery of it. I don't do a lot of the communal stuff because time, energy levels, preferences, introversion, take your pick. You pick of those are the reasons why I don't do a lot of the more things to do with Voxer and everything. I just, I don't know, I'm kind of shy. On that, when it comes to that, I'd rather just talk here and respond to comments. And yeah, anyway, enough blabbing. We have enough footage for sure, and I will see you next week. Tell me what you're reading, leave a little emoji, whatever you want to do. I'm fine with that. Have a good week. Bye-bye.